that everything that exists is part of that creative intelligence of the universe unfolding and expressing, that nothing is separate, it's all one. And I can see some heads shaking. I know that many of us in here have kind of agreed with that concept. But the question is not, do I agree with it? The question is, do I live from it? Or do I find myself living from a deeper belief, an older belief perhaps, in separation? That I'm apart from the divine. And it really is not only an intellectual leap to move into an acceptance of oneness, it's a very deep emotional leap. So let's see what Dr. Holmes had to say. And he said a lot of things about spirit, obviously, but this is one of the ones I think that applies here. He said, the world is saturated with divinity, immersed in reality, and filled with possibility. We must take this divine possibility and mold it into present actuality and everyday experience. This is the way to freedom, the pathway to peace and happiness. And everywhere you see a capital, that's a description of a divine idea. That spirit or God is more than just a being or an entity who has a personality. In fact, we don't believe that that's the case at all. We think it is the ground of being from which all things rise and to which all things return. That when we leave this incarnation, we continue to exist in some way, whether it's in form or not. We don't go to a place called heaven or a place called hell, because those are ideas that are effectively generated by human beings, by man, that we projected onto the universe. And there were a number of reasons for doing that as we evolved. But the world is saturated with divinity. Every particle, every cell of your being is saturated with divinity. If you limit your idea of God to an entity or a being that judges you on a moral basis, you're taking such a thin slice of that possibility to guide your life by. There's so much more. Because we would say, not only is God not judging you, there isn't anything in back of you that is capable of judgment. You are living as spirit, spirit as you. Not through you, as you, at the highest level. Now, it takes a while to get there for most of us in terms of being able to see that as something we can accept. Mostly because our conditioning is different, and also because we tend to experience and define reality based on what our five senses tell us. And if you go back, if you were back 3,000 or 4,000 years ago when these ideas were being generated, you were limited to your five senses. That was it. There were no microscopes or telescopes. There was no understanding the visible spectrum goes way beyond what we can actually see, or the aural spectrum, the sound spectrum, goes way beyond what we can actually hear, and that all of those spectra are part of one spectra of vibration that covers the whole universe. They had no idea about that. They knew that life was hard, that most of their children died, and that every now and then the tribe over the hill came over the hill and made life very difficult for them. And they wanted to know, why was life the way it was? So the ideas, the leaders of the tribes began to say, here's why, with an idea in mind of saying, I need to give them a story, A, that they will remember, and B, that will keep them in this tribe and not send them over the hill to the next one that may have a better story. So that's where the stories in Genesis and the stories in all the creation mythologies of all the different cultures of the world arose. They arose around little campfires of people that were very afraid of the world in which they found themselves, justifiably so. That had no idea of capacities beyond what they could experience in that very rough, very basic kind of a way of living. And as we've seen over time, particularly since about 400 years ago, with the Enlightenment, the awakening of reason and scientific discovery, a lot of those ideas have proven to be incredibly limited about the nature of reality. So how do we craft the story of the divine out of what we are knowing that what we know now is incomplete, that we will continue to learn more about our own natures and our own realities as we go forward? As Dr. Holmes said, human consciousness is ever expanding and ever growing. Well, it helps to begin with the idea that I see myself as part of a world that is saturated with divinity, immersed in reality, and filled with possibility. What if that's my go-to attitude? What if that's my default setting? That no matter what arises in my world, no matter what I see in the news, no matter what bad news I may get on a phone call or on Facebook, that's the first filter it goes through. Not the filter of separation, not the filter of fear, not the filter of somebody's got to go to hell if they do something wrong, but the filter of the world is saturated with divinity. What if I can get to that place? Kabir is an ecstatic poet of the Sufi tradition from India. He was around a century after Rumi, who's the best-selling poet in America, an 11th century Arab poet is the best-selling poet, mainly because his poetry is misunderstood. But Kabir said, "Behold but one in all things. It is the second that leads you astray." See, the idea that you and I are separate. Now, we're individuals, but we're not completely separate, because at the ground of being, we're part of the same thing. It would be like two fingers on your hand having an argument, or going to war, you know? Or your two hands going to war and inflicting injuries on each other and thinking that they were hurting not themselves but someone or something else. When we go to war with each other, it's the same thing. But our perspective at the moment is separation. War requires a perspective of separation. It's a necessary ingredient of human conflict. If I see you as me and me as you, what's to fight about? We may disagree, we may have an argument, but why would I hurt you? You see? So you can look across the planet today and say there's a big level of awareness that needs to develop and evolve, hopefully fairly quickly, at least faster than the weapons evolve, which isn't happening right now, in order for the world to end up being a peaceful place. Behold the one in all things. It's the second that leads us astray. Think about an area of conflict in your life right now. Maybe there's a person who you're having issues with, a relative, an ex, okay? Maybe you don't like the president. Or maybe you don't like somebody who doesn't like the president. But just think, I'm sure there's an area of conflict. If not, if you don't have any areas of your conflict in your life, see me after service and you can give the talk next week. I know somebody's going to come up and say. But as you think about that area of conflict, just notice as you think about that person or picture them or think about the situation that led to the conflict or the unfolding of the conflict, just notice the emotions that come up. And isn't the emotion, if you were to take it down to its deeper levels, based on separation? And it could show up as that person doesn't understand me or doesn't appreciate me. It could show up as I just don't like that person. They're evil, they're nasty, they're cruel. But in order for me to be in conflict, to be in a place of conflict, I have to be coming, at least in that moment, from a place of separation. That you and I are somehow different. We're not two fingers on the same hand. Now that gets easier and easier to do if your consciousness is one of my tribe and another tribe. My group and your group. The in-group and the out-group. We see that going on in the Middle East right now with a lot of groups. None of the groups seem to like each other. And we say, why can't they just get along? We say that as we drive down the freeway in LA. Not getting along with the people in the other cars. Why can't we just get along? You know, because we feel separate. That's that idiot over there just cut me off. The world is saturated in divinity. Is your world? Does it feel like it is? Does it feel like it is because it is, or does it feel like it isn't because it isn't, or does it feel like it is or isn't because of where you are and how you see yourself? This doesn't mean there aren't jerks in the world. This doesn't mean there aren't people that do evil deeds. It just means it's still one. That's all it means. Oneness, you accepting oneness doesn't make the world accept oneness. But there's dignity in being the first to accept it. There's dignity in being the first to forgive. There's dignity in being willing to be open. Even if it doesn't always turn out the way you think it should. We can't make our beliefs conditional on the outcomes. I can't say my world is at peace and make that say, I can't believe that. Well, because look, they're fighting somewhere across the world, or they're fighting in the next room. My world can be at peace no matter what they're doing. Because my world is not conditional on the other person's world, only on my interpretation of their world. So some questions. When we look at how do we define spirit or nature, if you don't like the word God, I know some of you don't like the word God, my advice would be get over it. But until you're ready to get over it, you can substitute any word you like. Creative intelligence of the universe, source, spirit, love, peace, whatever, Allah, whatever works. So what is my definition? What is your definition of God? If you were to, sit down right now in front of an inquisitor, the tribunal of elders called you forth and sat you down and said, please give us your definition of the creative intelligence of the universe, what would you say? Is it there, or you'd have to make it up on the spot? Well, I haven't really thought about that. Because another word for God is reality, with a capital R. What is your definition of the ultimate reality of things? Have you thought about that? So what is that definition? Does your definition, does your idea of God have form? Now I know, with many folks I know, and many folks brought up in the more traditional, more standard brand religions, that God is a being. It could be personified as Jesus, or could be personified as God the Father, up in heaven in a big office with a white jacket with a big gold G on his pocket. Big smite button on his computer. Some see God as a cosmic bellhop. I pray for something, I expect God to get it. Right? Some see God as just this judgmental being that's always angry that you have to hide from. Try not to think about too much. These are important questions because they form the basis of your reality and my reality as we see and interpret and respond to the world around us. How does this fit in? How does what this person is doing or that group is doing or what I'm reading in the paper fit into my view of reality, my ultimate view of reality? What image have I given God, if I've given one? You know, we say God doesn't have form. God includes all form, but is beyond form. How do you get a picture of that? Maybe a cloud? You know? A light? Your dog? Whatever works. You know, it doesn't really matter. And how is this definition working for me or against me in my life? See, when Eleanor was practicing as in that Protestant tradition, the God in her life was working against her. It was causing her to see the world and herself in a limited way. Her view of God, not what God is, her view of God. See, God doesn't care what you think of God. This is really important because I know if you were brought up like I was, you know, I was told when I sinned, it hurt God. So I hurt God a lot as a kid, and I knew I was hurting God. And it just drove me into a hole of wanting not to be seen. I was so ashamed. Because no matter what I did, I couldn't not hurt God. I was an American boy. I was killing things, I was smoking, I was cussing. This was even before I started thinking about girls. And really went to hell. If you want to get a good image of it, some of us went and saw the movie Boyhood that's out right now, that was filmed over 12 years about a young boy growing up. And it's just one little snapshot, but it really does give you kind of a feel of what, you know, what's going on with our young kids, and how are they, what impressions do they get? How do they decide what the world is like? And how does that continue as we grow up? You know, I was given this ideal of behavior, which was to be perfect in all ways, to be pure and perfect in all ways, and to commit no sin. And they had confession, so every week you got to have the slate wiped clean. Every Saturday morning we went to confession, and by lunchtime Saturday, I was in the darkness again. And I just saw God as just really disappointed guy up in the sky, just sitting there going, oh, God, what am I going to do with you? Oh, me, I guess he was saying. So if we begin with the idea that God or spirit or whatever term you want to use is all that there is, everything, it's infinite. This is so important, the idea of spirit being infinite. You can only have one infinite. You can't have an infinite and something. Because if there's something that exists outside of the infinite isn't infinite anymore. It's finite. So the idea of spirit being infinite is critical to an understanding that therefore you and me are part of it. We're within the infinite. No matter how many shameful things you've done in your life or would do, you can never be expelled from that body. If you're still here, you're still part of it. And if you're not here physically anymore, you're still part of it. Nothing you could ever do would separate you from that which created you, that out of which you arose. Nothing. Nothing. Now, you could see how in a tribal consciousness that idea might be problematic, because there was a societal incentive to have people behave and not go around killing and stealing from each other. And often religion, they gave the job to God to be the cop. Well, I may not see what you're doing wrong, but God sees everything. Now, that didn't work with me, but it probably would work with some people. It probably worked with me sometimes. But many of us grew up with that kind of, the idea of the supreme being looking over our shoulder, looking under the sheets at night, and judging us. God exists everywhere and is accessed within us. So in the Gospel of Thomas, there's a wonderful little quote that says, "Behold, I am everywhere. The kingdom is within and without. It fills you and it surrounds you." That it's all divine. This is a huge break from what's in the Synoptic Gospels in the Bible. Because in the Christian tradition, in the New Testament tradition, the way it evolved was there is spirit which is pure and there is flesh which is sinful. Spirit and matter. If it's all God, it's all sacred. There is no division. So everything about you is sacred. Yet how many of us were taught that we were sacred beings as we grew up? Maybe a few. John was. Have you accepted it yet? Working on it, yeah, see? It's not. That's the hardest thing sometimes to accept, is that we are sacred, that we are worthy, that we deserve good, because we know what we've done. We know how we've disappointed and betrayed ourselves and others. We know we've cheated on our taxes and not taken the change back when we got too much. But see, the universe isn't a moral system. The universe itself, the infinite, is not a moral system. It's an amoral system. We are left to our own to find our highest level and to seek our highest level. And the only way we can really do that is not to tie ourselves down with limiting beliefs. So it doesn't mean we don't deal with the consequences of what we've done, but it means we don't identify ourselves by what we've done. The law we're operating with is impersonal in the sense that it applies the same to all. The law of cause and effect, you might call it. As we think into our experience, that our experience becomes. This is so critical to understanding. The universe is a self-organizing system. We know that now. They didn't know that back in the day, when in the Old Testament times. They didn't know the universe was a self-organizing system. They didn't even know the universe existed. They thought the sky was solid, and there were little lights in it, called the firmament. And they thought if you left the earth, you'd crash into it like we'd crash into the ceiling. They didn't know about a universe. But we know about the universe now. We know a lot about how the universe functions. We know the same laws apply, physical laws apply at every edge of the universe. No matter how far you go from here, gravity's still gravity. Electromagnetism is still electromagnetism. The light spectrum is the same. We know that no matter what you're talking about in terms of a substance in the universe, if it's a planet or your little finger, they're all made of the same thing. Oneness, oneness, oneness. This basic building block of the universe that becomes an atom, that becomes everything in it. I put a thing on Facebook this week, this quote I saw, and just a little piece of it is this young woman saying she read a sentence when she was 19 that changed her life. And the sentence was this: since the Big Bang, nothing has been added to the universe and nothing has been subtracted. The exact same amount of energy exists 14 billion years later as existed at that moment, that nanosecond of the Big Bang. This whole universe has lost nothing, has gained nothing. And it won't. It won't. What does that mean? Think about that. How much time do we spend trying to add stuff to our lives or get rid of stuff? You know, to be different, to be more of us or less of us, to gain weight or lose weight. What if we recognize we're all part of a self-organizing system? Within me is a level of intelligence that is part of an infinite mind, an infinite idea that knows exactly how to attract to it all of these random atoms to put them into such an order that I have a functioning human body. Who do you think's doing that? You are. And you think there's something wrong with you? Imagine the intelligence it's taking right now to hold you together. Not just to hold you together as a clump of atoms, but to hold you together as a supremely amazing functioning system of biological organs and chemicals and fluids, including as much as 60% of you that isn't even part of you. It's other organisms that are helping out. About 60% of you is not even you physically. What's holding that together, if not the intelligence of the universe as you? It's miraculous. We think a new iPhone is amazing. Wow. In the Perennial Philosophy, Huxley says, "Nobody has yet invented a spiritual calculus in terms of which we may talk coherently about the divine ground and of the world conceived as its manifestation." We don't know how to talk about God. We don't have the language. We don't have the capacity to fully understand an infinite, even though we are part of it. But that doesn't mean we don't try to conceptualize. And so the idea is, as you're thinking about the nature of spirit, is you can never think too big. As you're thinking about the nature of reality, notice where you're putting limits on it. And that's where you want to let it grow. It's kind of like when if you're hanging around a second grader, they've got some big problems in their lives. And they're all second grade problems, like fractions. And they're struggling with the idea of how do you divide 1 into 2? Remember? It seemed like the biggest problem in the world until you get to third grade, and then fractions are nothing. Right? Well, you can look back on your old self that way too, about your old ideas of divinity and your own nature as being like that second grader, a natural level of development that one has to go through to get to a higher place of understanding. We have to have a higher level of understanding because there's so much more to understand. We never arrive. Back in the, people have said, oh, we've learned all we can possibly learn about science. They said that in about 1750. Because in that person's individual mind, they couldn't conceive of something more to learn. Because we don't know what we don't know. But we should have ample evidence by now that we're moving toward an infinite, and you never arrive at an infinite. So the journey doesn't end, so it must be the journey is what it's about. My journey in coming to understand the nature of reality, with a capital R, as me, through me. That's what this is about. That's this whole life experience. There's nothing else to do except learn how to do it in community. As Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. That's all we're doing. So if you'd like to pick up the book and read along with us, it's in the bookstore. We're giving away a free CD of Spiritual Mind Treatments with it. And I know many of you already have the book. Just take a chance to review it. And really, the book I wrote called Sacred Thinking is really about trying to put our philosophy into terminology that isn't filled with jargon, and it also relates it to other faith tradition. There's lots of quotes in there from other faith traditions that apply to what we're talking about in each section. And the nature of spirit is simply that it's infinite. We can never know it all. What we want to do is do our best not to limit it. Not to be in that place of that small God. Not to be in that place of thinking that I'm limited in what I can access in terms of intelligence in this universe. Not to be in that place of saying there is no way through to a better, more peaceful existence. And everything that comes up that challenges those concepts is in effect a door to the next level of awakening. Your biggest problem right now in your life, and everybody's got one, mine's bigger than yours, but everybody's got a biggest problem all the time. Your biggest problem is in a sense your greatest gift, because behind, on the other side of that problem, lies a level of awakeness that you are ready to achieve. About yourself, about the world around you, and about the nature of reality. We have so much to learn. Let's get to it. So thank you, and namaste.
Hi, Jim.